Hey guys, Pauly and Teddy with SportsBit, Betting Insight today on SBR. Time for the NFC North. We previewed this division a while back. Green Bay Packers, the class of that division. Vikings got off to a strange start. They started 5-0. Then all hell broke loose with all the injuries. You had Norv Turner, the OC, resigning in the middle of the year. Also, Mike Zimmer with the eye surgeries already. And certainly not a fan of Matthew Stafford, as you'll see with the Lions preview as well. So here's the NFC North here on SBR and SportsBit. The Bears win total 5.5 under -150. Last year 3-13 straight up. How the hell are they going to win 6 games? 7-9 ATS, 7-8-1 to the under. Mainstream stats: 11 takeaways, dead last. 31 giveaways, that was 30th. -20 turnover margin, tied for last with the Jets. Offense 5.9 yards per play. Tied for 5th with the Pats, 4.6 yards per rush. Tied for 5th, 7.4 yards per pass attempt, slightly above average, and 28 sacks allowed. The defense, 5.5 yards per play allowed average, 37 sacks, slightly above average. Opponent's QB rating, 93.5, and 4.4 yards per rush allowed, below average. All hell broke loose. Their fans hated the move. Hated it. And you saw it on draft day. They gave Glennon all that money, and they traded up to take Trubisky. All the Bears fans and all the guys from VSiN who are from Chicago say this team is going to be awful, and I believe them.
Okay, let's start. Okay, you just went through a ton of information, and I want to hit on a bunch of these points. All right, the Bears went 3-13 last year. Why did they go 3-13? Well, we just looked at their stats. They're tied with the Patriots with the number 5 offense in the NFL in yards per play. They're better than average rushing. They're better than average passing. They're better than average protecting the quarterback. Defense, average yards per play allowed, average sacks. Their pass defense was dicey. Their run defense was dicey, but neither were miserable. Those are not the stats of a 3-13 team. They're the stats of a 6-10 team or a 7-9 team, maybe an 8-8 team, hell, maybe a 9-7 team. So how did they go 3-13? Well, number 1, they had a quarterback problem, and number 2, their defense didn't take. They didn't no takeaways. When you're -20 in turnovers, that's tied for dead last in the NFL with the Jets. And the teams that finish -20, there's one of them every couple of years or two, 1 or 2 a year, that'll be in that range. They all stink, and they all get better the next year. It's the nature of football. So when you say, where are the Bears coming from? And everyone in Chicago, there's not a person in Chicago that I know of, and I know lots of guys in Chicago, that ever has a good feeling about the Bears going to the campaign and ever likes what management does. We could talk about the draft and the Trubisky move in a moment, but let's make this clear. The Bears' stats were a lot better than a 3-13 last year, with the exception of 3-13 team, with the exception of turnovers, and they have a chance, obviously. Their turnover margin will be less than -20 this year, obviously, and they got a chance to turn it around turnover-wise in a big way if the moves that John Fox and company made in the offseason can actually make this defense a takeaway unit as opposed to a crappy unit.
All right, I don't see that. I think Fox is a bad coach. He's still stuck in the 80s. He leads the league in punting from the opponent's 40 when it's 4th and 1. Cause for concern if they get off to a slow start, which they will. They'll probably put Trubisky in there, and he won't be ready. And also, I don't like their skill position players. White can't get on the field, hasn't been able to stay healthy. Jordan Howard's nice, but other than that, who's gonna make any plays for this team?
Okay, let's start with the John Fox thing, okay? I'm not in love with John Fox, and I'm with you on some game management stuff. That makes me nuts. That being said, John Fox took the Carolina Panthers in their 2nd year of existence. They were an expansion team. He took them to the Super Bowl, to the NFC Championship game, and then later so the 2nd year they were in the championship game. Later they went to a Super Bowl. Then you look at what happened in Denver, and obviously he took another team to a Super Bowl. So you say, all right, this coach's time is...
No, he did not. Not in Denver. That was Kubiak.
He didn't win the Super Bowl. He took them to the Super Bowl. Yes, no question. He didn't win the Super Bowl in Carolina either, but he took 2 different teams into the Super Bowl. You can't tell me that the guy doesn't know how to coach on some level when you've gone that far twice. Okay, once could be a fluke, twice can be a fluke, maybe. There's something to like about John Fox. And everyone was like, last year, 2nd year, here's John Fox. Everything's going to go right for Chicago. And everything went wrong. And now they're saying, oh, well, 3rd year, he's an idiot. He doesn't know anything. Maybe the improvement comes this year as opposed to last year. Let's look at the draft before we get into the skill position talent stuff. Obviously, the big move for Trubisky, the number 2 pick, he's being called a tight end. Adam Shaheen, he's an athlete. Then you're talking about 4th round and 5th round guys. So really, the top 2 picks in the draft, Chicago can't expect to get a ton from this year. Trubisky's got a shot to start. Even though they paid Mike Glennon, certainly has a shot to start. And if the season goes in the tank, Trubisky likely will start. But when you look at how Chicago might be better this year compared to last year, it's not going to be because of the draft.
Another thing, they've been horrible for a long time at home. 6-18 straight up the last 3 years in an ATS disaster.
Yeah, and really, you can go back further for the ATS disaster. I mean, they've been very, very, very bad point spread team at home for a number of years. Everyone says, oh, the Bears are going home. They're live. You know, that's your classic talking head comment on TV. There hasn't been a home field edge at Soldier Field. And when I make my home fields, I do it each individual team. And the Bears are always near the bottom for home field advantage. But let's talk about what's right. You don't like the skill position talent? I'm there with you. You don't like the quarterback position? No problem. Let's talk about the rest of the roster because they made a lot of good moves this offseason. I know they used only 1 draft pick on a defensive player, but they signed Quentin Demps, and I know he's not a young safety, but he's someone who will help. And they got Prince Amakumara from the Giants. I think that's a good deal. They got Marcus Cooper, who's looked decent for the Chiefs and the Cardinals. That's 3 upgrades in a secondary that was awful last year. 3 new starters, and all 3 of them are upgrades over anyone was on that team a season ago. Now, the other thing that Chicago has that makes me think that they may be better than people expect this year, their offensive line's rock solid. You know, you have the left guard in Josh Sitton, the center Cody Whitehair, the right guard Kyle Long. All 3 of those guys, I don't know if they're Pro Bowl caliber, they're solid players. They've had problems at the tackle positions in Leno and Massey, but overall, that offensive line, I think, is a lot better than people are giving them credit for. So the secondary's been upgraded. The offensive line has been upgraded. And those are 2 areas where the betting markets sometimes don't exactly get excited about, and they matter so much over the course of the season. I'm not as bearish on this team as you are, Pauly. I'm really not.
You're a piece of work. I see in the schedule, with the schedule breakdown, you can see they could start 1-7. Yet you somehow think they're going to win 6 games, but you think they're going to start 1-7.
Well, okay, the Bears are exactly the kind of team. I'm telling you, I'm pretty good at season wins. You know that, okay? They're exactly the kind of team that starts the season 1-7, 2-6, and then goes 5-3 in the back half with a lame duck coach after Fox has been fired and Trubisky wins them game, and they win 6 games to beat you. I'm telling you. And of course, remember, they opened 5. South Point opened 5 on the Bears. A lot of books opened 5. And all the early money came in on the over. The very first bets were coming over on Chicago. It's only later that we've seen a little bit of under money come in. That's why it's minus 150 on the under right now. But you look at this schedule, yeah, it's tough. And the first half is absolutely brutal. The NFC North faces the AFC North and the NFC South. There are 2 extra games at Philadelphia and San Francisco. You can split a 1-1 right there. But when you look at the start of the season, they have Atlanta, at Tampa, Pittsburgh, at Green Bay. That's 0-4 written all over it. I'm with you. And at 0-4, all of a sudden, Trubisky's in play and everyone comes out. But if they can steal one of those games, maybe all of a sudden things get a little bit easier. Because certainly the back half of the campaign, when they get the Lions at home and they get the Browns and they get San Francisco and Cincinnati, 2 games against the Lions on home and road, they have a chance to finish the second half of that season with 4-4 or 5-3. I'm not betting this team under, Pauly. I'm just not going to do it. I think there is hope for Chicago, and from a point spread perspective, I think we'll make money with this team this year. I really do.
On to the Detroit Lions. Win total 7.5. Over minus 130. The 8's also available with heavy juice to the under. Last year 9-7 straight up. 7-8-1 ATS, 10-6 to the under. Mainstream stats, 14 takeaways, tied for 29th. 15 giveaways, 5th best in the NFL. Offense, 5.5 yards per play average. 3.7 yards per rush, 6th worst. 7.3 yards per pass average, and 37 sacks allowed. slightly below average. The Raiders just gave Carr $25 million a year. Oh no, Matthew Stafford, it looks like Detroit's going to make him the highest paid player in NFL history. Look away, look away. He's 4-43 in his career against teams that finished the season with a winning record, including 1-21 on the road. Don't do it, Detroit. He stinks. He had Megatron for a lot of his career as well. 4-43. Run away, Detroit. Run away.
Now, see, here's where you and I are going to disagree. All right? 4-43 is certainly not a record to be proud of. But you're blaming it all on Matthew Stafford. I am not. The Lions went 9-7 last year. Lions stunk last year, okay? They weren't good at anything. And they went 9-7 entirely because Matthew Stafford made enough plays for them to win ball games. And no, their record isn't great. It isn't even good, particularly on the highway. But as we do this exercise every year here on SportsBit, go through every team, you see it so consistently. Any team with a decent quarterback, they're lined 7 wins or higher. The teams that don't have a QB, they're all lined at 6.5 wins or lower. It's the same thing this year. When we talked about the Bears yesterday as a team that, they've got a much bigger QB situation this year than Detroit does. Look where they're lined, 5.5. So I understand that it sounds ridiculous to make Matthew Stafford the highest paid NFL player, but that's what you got to do. You got to lock him up. You cannot let this guy go. You'll be that much worse. You have to.
Yeah, see that? Yeah, that's how many playoff wins he has, too. Yeah, got to lock him up. He's got 0 playoff wins, yeah.
So what do you want to do? I mean, I watched Detroit when John Kitna was playing QB for them.
How about not throw interceptions in the fourth quarter? That would be a start, too. How many times did you do that last year? Win a goddamn road game. That'd be another one. What do you think of the defense?
Well, last year was miserable. When I say miserable, I mean miserable. 5.9 yards per play allowed. That was bottom quartile. 26 sacks. That was 31 in the NFL. Only Oakland had fewer. Opponent's quarterback rating against the Lions was 107.2. That's dead last in the NFL. That's worse than Cleveland. The number 30 team, the Jets, was 98.5. So they lapped the league in how bad their pass defense. And, of course, the rush defense wasn't any better. 4.4 yards allowed. Also below average. So when you look at Detroit, you blame everything on Stafford. Their offense was okay last year. Again, 15 giveaways. That was 5th best in the NFL. The problem last year was their defense stunk. And they still won 9 games, Pauly.
How about needs and what they did in the draft?
Well, I mean, they needed everything on defense. They needed, defensive line help. They needed linebacking help. They needed cornerback help. And they got some of that. Gerard Davis, the number 1 pick out of Florida, has the potential to be an impact player as a rookie at the linebacker position. And Teez Tabor, the cornerback out of Florida, another guy with enormous upside. When it comes to the defensive line, however, well, that's a big question mark. And certainly in free agency, I wasn't thrilled with what the Lions did and didn't do in terms of surrounding Stafford with skill position talent and with shoring up the front 4 on defense. I mean, it's all about Ziggy Ansah for this team. And when it comes to a pass rush, he certainly has, he's a legit force at defensive end on the one side. But if he gets hurt or if something happens to Ziggy Ansah, man, they've got no pass rush whatsoever, which is, opponents completed close to 73% of their passes against Detroit last year. They gave up 33 touchdowns last year. And oh, by the way, the Lions have not selected a defensive back in the first round in any of the last 18 drafts. Maybe it's time.
All right, strength of schedule. Biggest jump in toughness in the division. League average this year after below average last year. You got a sandwich spot, potentially Week 10 against the Browns in the middle of 3 divisional foes. NFC South faces the AFC North. And the NFC South, 2 extra games. Arizona at home and at the Giants. What do you think? Anything jump out to you as far as the schedule? It is tough right out of the gate. Look at that. Arizona at the Giants, Atlanta at Minnesota.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you look at their road games, you don't see a whole lot of winnable road games, for a team that struggled. Giants, Vikings, Saints, Packers, Bears, and they always lose in Chicago. Ravens, Bucks, and Bengals. You're not necessarily talking about the NFL's elite teams, but you're not talking about pushovers in any of those road contests. Every one of those teams, I believe, is lined, except for Chicago, at 7.5 or higher. So it's easy to project a 1-7 type road record for Detroit again this year. Now, they did have a biggest jump in toughness compared to last year. But They're only league average in strength of schedule in 2017. They were below average in the league strength of schedule last year, hence that 9-7 record.
Here we go. Green Bay Packers win total 10.5, under $1.25. Last year, 10-6 straight up, 9-6-1 ATS, 10-6 to the over, 17 giveaways, which was 8th, 25 takeaways, plus 8 margin was 6th in the league. Offense, 5.8 yards per play, above average, 4.5 yards per rush, above average, 7.2 yards per pass, and 35 sacks allowed average. Hard to believe that this team started 4-6 with Aaron Rodgers, but they finished strong. Something to consider here, and it's always big, especially if you're looking at the win total going over. The quarterback does not like the head coach, and they don't get along, and that's cause for concern, Teddy.
We know there was a fair bit of disconnect, McCarthy-Rodgers last year, where more than a little disconnect between the two, but it appeared as if things were worked out. We haven't heard any rumblings in the offseason, and we're talking about one of the, if not the best quarterback in the NFL. All apologies to Tom Brady, all apologies to anyone. But, I mean, that offense, with all the issues they had last year, offensive line questions. They were using converted wide receivers. They're starting running back. They had, injuries at wide receiver. With all of that, they're finishing in the top quartile in yards per play. The running game was there, and Rodgers was once again brilliant. As you mentioned, 8th in the NFL with only 8 takeaways. But the bigger concerns last year, and much of what got them off to that 4-6 start last year, the defense wasn't very good, Pauly, and that's where they spent a good portion of the offseason working on.
Yeah, offense stunk at the start of the season, too. 6 yards per play allowed, tied for dead last with Indy and New Orleans. 40 sacks, tied for 6th. Opposing QB rating, 97.2 and 4.1 yards per rush allowed. They drafted King, the cornerback out of Washington. Also, the Jones, the safety out of NC State. I like Williams, the running back from BYU as well. And another weapon for Rodgers. Cook goes to Oakland, and they get Bennett to play tight end from Green Bay as well.
Yeah, and that's a big pickup. Martellus Bennett, a guy who has a real immediate impact potential. But let's go back to the draft for a minute. You talk about King and Jones. The King might have been the best combination. I love this guy at quarterback. He was a difference maker for the Huskies, and he's big. He's 6'3". He's got a potential to be a legitimate shutdown corner pretty early in his NFL career. And I love Josh Jones, the safety, as well. So you talk about those two in the draft, plus the addition of they got somebody else to do. They had a big free agent pick. They cut Shields, they let Micah Hyde go, and then they re-signed their former cornerback, Devin House, who was in Jacksonville. So when you're talking about three young guys in the secondary, there's talent there that they didn't have a year ago at cornerback and safety. I think that will certainly help a defense that, as you mentioned, they gave up 6 yards per play last year. That was tied for the last in the NFL. You don't win Super Bowls doing that.
Yeah, well, Packer fans all over Ted Thompson, too, and they should be. They haven't made a big move in a long time. O-line, average, not above average, not elite. What do you think of the strength of schedule?
Yeah, let me go to the O-line for a minute because, they have two of the better pass protecting tackles in the NFL. They really do, and Bakhtiari and Balaga. But the interior of that line is loaded with question marks. They're hoping that Kyle Murphy or Jason Spriggs can be difference makers this year. And if one of those guys can make the switch effectively to guard, it will help them a long way. But at least they've got the tackles to protect Aaron Rodgers. From a scheduling standpoint this season, Green Bay is not in bad shape. Their schedule is weaker than last year. Last year's was slightly tougher than an average schedule. This year they're right at 500 in terms of where their opponents are priced for this year's, based on this year's season win totals. They get a bunch of early home games. They do have a fairly tough slate early. They have Seattle, at Atlanta. They got at Dallas, New Orleans, Minnesota, all before the break. So I wouldn't be surprised if they start off mediocre. But the back half of that schedule, there's not an opponent that they can't be. The one game at Pittsburgh in Week 12 is the one that stands out. And even with at Carolina, Week 15, the division games aren't brutal for Green Bay, not in a division where all the other teams are lined at 500 or less. I mean, Green Bay's lying right where they should be. They're a 10.5 win team. FBO has them at 10-6. They finished 10-6 last year. If I had to bet the Packers, I'd probably bet them as a 10-win team, not as an 11-win team. But I wouldn't be surprised that, it's not anything that I'm going to get to the betting window with when I have when I think I got a half a game's worth of edge. That's not enough.
All right, Minnesota Vikings, win total 8.5, under -120. Last year, 8-8 straight up, 7-9 to the under. Mainstream stats, 16 giveaways, which was 7th, 27 takeaways. Plus 11 turnover margin was tied for 4th. Offense, 5 yards per play, bottom 5. 3.2 yards per rush, dead last. 7 yards per pass, below average. 38 sacks allowed, bottom 10. It was a nasty defense. It was a strange season. They started 5-0. I thought they were going to make the playoffs and make some noise and win a couple games in the playoffs. They lost their head coach with eye surgery. Norv Turner, the offensive coordinator, quit in November. The offensive line was decimated by injury. They lost Adrian Peterson. They lost key guys on the defense. After the 5-0 start, the bye week happened at the wrong time, and nothing went right from a health standpoint, and they finished 8-8. It was a horror show after the early start, and the Dallas game at home on Thursday night should have won. They blew both games against Detroit. They should have swept them. They lost to Philly with all those turnovers when there was a kickoff return for a touchdown with the Eagles as well. Every close game went against them down the stretch as well. It was a weird season for the Vikings.
Yeah, but an interesting story with Minnesota, and let's go back to those initial offensive stats. They're bottom 5 in yards per play. They're dead last in yards per rush. They're below average in yards per pass, and they're bottom 10 in sacks allowed. Okay, all of that came, we know the offensive line was bad, and we know that Adrian Peterson got hurt and they couldn't run the football all year. But Sam Bradford came in and had the highest completion percentage of any quarterback in the NFL. And he completed all this dink and dunk and dink and dunk. He didn't take any shots downfield. And they were able to have some success moving the football via the pass. But boy, when it came to crunch time of close games, Sam Bradford did exactly what he's done at every previous stop in his NFL career, which is not make plays with the game on the line. He cost them, I'm not going to say it was Bradford alone, but Bradford, in my mind, a big part of the reason why that offense failed so much over the back half of the campaign following that 5-0 start.
I love what they did in the draft. They got a gift with Cook falling to them at the second round. They also grabbed Murray from the Raiders as they say goodbye to AP, who goes to the Saints as well. They also they addressed the offensive line with a couple moves in the defense as well. I don't think they need a lot. They brought Reif in to shore up the offensive line, and I think they'll compete with Green Bay for the division. What do you think of this team?
Well, I mean, let's start with the defense, because the strength of Minnesota last year and in recent seasons is defense. Mike Zimmer, the head coach, is a defensive mind. He was Marvin Lewis's defense coordinator in Cincinnati, and a bright defensive mind at that. And last year, again, 5.1 yards per play allowed. That was tied with Seattle for number 5 in the NFL. They had 41 sacks. That was number 5 in the NFL. Their opponent's QB rating, only 83. That was a top 5 pass defense. 4.2 yards per rush allowed was average. Obviously, when we talk about what happened in the draft and the offseason, it was mostly about fixing the offense that couldn't do anything right for extended stretches last year. But defensively, this team does have a lot of pieces in place to have another solid season this year. Certainly that secondary, very, very good on paper, as is the pass rush. When it comes to the offensive line, I mean, glaring weakness last year. Was a complete disaster for this squad. And they spent huge money in free agency. Picked up Riley Reif and Mike Remmers, 2 guys who have been decent, but certainly haven't been elite level offensive line at the NFL level. But you like what they've done on defense. You like at the running back position with a little bit of depth now, obviously Murray and Cook. And you look at the offensive line improvements, maybe there's some things to like about this squad, but there's also some things that I'm not in love with about this squad. And some of it has to do with the interior of that offensive line, where the rookie third-rounder, Pat Elflein, may well end up being the starting center, or Joe Berger, another guy who I don't have a lot of faith in. Zimmer on the offensive line, quote, Riley Reif is playing left tackle, and he's done a nice job. This is after mini camps. He's going to go to work every day, make you compete. He's going to make you work. I really like his mentality. Mike Remmers, who's playing the right tackle, is really doing the same thing. The thing I like about Mike is, he gets a chance to go after Everson Griffin every day, so he's going to give him a lot of different looks. And Danielle Hunter, He gives him a lot of different looks, different sets, changes things up. And he's a battler, and he'll compete. And frankly, that offensive line didn't compete last year. Remmer and Reif have the potential to give them something of an upgrade there, something they desperately need if they're going to be a playoff team this season.
I say good riddance to Patterson. He leaves and goes to the Raiders. But here's another look at. They took Treadwell in the first round last year. He caught one pass in 9 games. What's that all about? What a bust that guy was in his first year. What do you have on the schedule?
Well, I don't blame Treadwell. Again, Bradford didn't take any shots. They brought in Treadwell to give.
Well, it's not on him. That's the scheme. Caught one pass in 9 games.
I'm going to disagree. Bridgewater was, they brought in Treadwell to give Bridgewater a deep threat. Bradford, every pass was a check down pass. So I'm not saying that Treadwell he was wide open every play and burning the field and the coaches didn't do it. It didn't get him involved. I'm saying that some of that has to do with the fact that it was a quarterback that took every check down in the Alex Smith fashion. When it comes to strength this season, they have the weakest opposing schedule in the division based on this year's win total numbers. Slightly below average for the NFL as a whole. Very comparable to last year in terms of strength of schedule numbers. Minnesota gets their fair share of prime time. They've got a Monday night game at Chicago. They have a Saturday night game before Christmas at Green Bay and a handful of late starts as well, plus a game, I believe it's in London, against the Cleveland Browns. They get 3 of their first 4 at home. And in fact, if you look at their schedule pre-bye, no surprise here. The 2 games will be dogs are at Pittsburgh and at home against Green Bay. Every other game they're going to be favored in. No surprise here if the Vikings once again get off to a hot start and face the tougher half of their campaign down the backstretch.
What do you think, 8.5?
I'm not betting them over. I'm worried about Zimmer. I'm worried about the chemistry issues as things fell apart last year. And I'm no Sam Bradford fan. I will not bet Bradford over 8.5.
All right, that's the NFC North. Packers the class of that division. I have the Vikings second. Lions will be down. And certainly not a fan of Stafford. It's going to be a long year for the Bears as well. We will catch you next time on Sports Bet, Betting Insight Today.